Hello and welcome back, everybody. Can I just check that everybody's here? I think everybody's back now. Okay, it's now 2 o'clock and we shall resume the hearing discussion into matter 16 and the safeguarded site at Peck's Hill. Just to finish off a discussion in terms of Greenbelt discussion, can Mr. Cross kick off by setting out his view in terms of the effect of any potential future development on the Greenbelt, please?
Thank you. Yes, I think as we covered the morning session, any development on this site is liable to have negative impact. The site is surrounded on most sides by urban or urban type development. Whilst the northern boundary is currently weak, there is potential to create a firm boundary that would stop further encroachment.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of the developers, what's your view, Mr. Mitchell? Do you want to start off?
Thank you, Mark. I don't really have anything to add to that. I think we've set it out in the document. We've done a sort of development strategy. We've looked at the boundaries, and we're confident that a long-term defensible boundary to the north of the site can be provided for.
Okay, thank you, Ms. McGrath.
Yes, I'd agree. I have nothing else to add to that part of the discussion.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap in terms of the discussion we had this morning, in terms of the gap and strengthening boundaries, etc. And conscious of probably be covering old ground again, but in terms of the exceptional circumstances to release the site from the Greenbelt, Mr. Cross.
It would only be to reiterate the same debate in relation to W4 and W5.
Okay, we just had a point on that, which it's more of a general point really, but I'm conscious that it's probably going to come up in tomorrow's discussion, is that in previous session on Greenbelt discussion, the council stated that the safeguarded land wasn't set aside for a particular purpose. Now, I am conscious that the site was previously allocated for housing in the publication draft. What's your view on that in terms of the demonstrating exceptional circumstances if the site isn't earmarked for a particular purpose?
I think we dealt with that in a previous session where you inquired as to the level of safeguarded land proposed, and we answered that in relation to the overall development requirements, so including housing and employment. Obviously, this site has been previously proposed for housing. It is surrounded on two sides by housing, and that would probably be the most likely use, but to say no, at this time the council isn't stating a final use for the site. That would be determined in a future plan review.
But in terms of making the case for exceptional circumstances to release this particular site, Mr. Cross?
as I say, the site was previously proposed for housing. It's likely that if it comes forward for development that it would come forward for housing. But I say the council hasn't stated emphatically, it hasn't come to a view. I say that would be for a future plan review. The council has set out in its evidence the overall quantum of development proposed for safeguarded land, and we basically we resort to that documentation.
Okay, but in terms of meeting, as you've said in earlier sessions, meeting a housing need in Widnes, that would form part of the case for making exceptional circumstances to release this site.
Clearly, the housing shortfall is the key. It has been the key driver in terms of identifying additional land, and it's obviously the key driver in the need for additional safeguarded land.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mitchell and Ms. McGrath, do you have anything to add to that in terms of the exceptional circumstances case?
Only just to really make the point that it's obviously our case that the site is needed now. We've argued through the Matter 2 session, it was my colleague on the housing numbers argument overall, that the growth's not enough in this borough. That's obviously a separate discussion. And we've also argued in the supply of land in relation to some of the brownfield sites that they're not going to come forward at the rate envisaged. So there is a compelling case to release this site now. Thank you.
And all I would add to that is that the technical investigations which have been submitted as part of the representations confirm the site is deliverable for housing.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to that shortly. Okay, are there any other points in terms of Greenbelt before we move on to look at the potential adverse impacts of developing the site? No? Okay then. So Mr. Cross, if you could set out the potential adverse impacts of developing the site highlighted in the site assessments. I would park highways, we'll come on to that as a separate issue. So if you could focus on the other matters first, please, Mr. Cross.
Thank you. Again, the summary table set out in our Matter 16 statement. It identifies a potential negative impact of soil, which again is primarily just the loss of currently farmed agricultural land. Identifies possible negative impacts on heritage and health. Health will be the proximity to local health facilities. Obviously, we have mentioned that there is a provision of a new facility underway, hopefully, at the Upton Rocks local centre, so that assessment would potentially change somewhat. And I believe that just looking at the statements over lunch, that there's identification of a listed building within the site. So again, any development would have to have respect to the setting of the listed building.
Okay, and again, contamination has been raised in the site assessment as a potential. Is that a similar issue to SG12?
I very much suspect at 2% on one of the parcels that it's going to be a backfilled pond.
Okay, and is that something that the site investigations have highlighted as an issue, Mr. McGrath?
Thank you. The first point I just wanted to make was regards to the farming side of things. Our client's land is currently farmed for arable crops and has been for the last 20 years or so, but they do suffer with increasing problems with trespass over crops, and as there are no public footpaths across the site, sort of trespassing over the crops can be a particular issue. It is still farmed, but it is with increasing difficulty, and it's not as intensely farmed as it was in previous historical years.
The site assessment states that part of the site is grade 2. Do you know which part that is, Mr. McGrath or Mr. Cross?
I'm afraid I don't. I can have a look for that. Bear with me.
Okay, thank you.
Not without recourse to the mapping. This has been raised at a number of sites, so if it would assist, we can provide an AO map showing the latest land agricultural land classifications?
Yes, that would be helpful. I mean, just as a diverging a little bit, but just as a general point, obviously it has been raised in a number of sites. Is it an issue that's been looked at, across the borough or the city region level in terms of the loss of Grade 2 agricultural land and the impact that may have?
I'm sure there'll probably be sort of general agreement across some of the other parties. The agricultural land mapping is not the best. I think in the previous assessment it was very, that was used at the time of the essay, it was very broad brush. I think some more detailed mapping has been provided over recent years, which is a little bit more fine-grained, but still certainly has issues. But I think the assessment, the majority of land in Halton, I think the largest part of the land is Grade 2. There is some Grade 1 from memory south of Hale, and there are then obviously parcels of 3, 4 and 5 interspersed at various locations across the borough.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the contamination point, Ms McGrath, is that something that's been picked up in investigations as a particular issue?
No, it hasn't. It's not something which we consider as a significant issue.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned the Grade 2 listed building, Norlands House, I believe, Mr. Cross, and from representations, the developers considered that could be just dealt with by, sort of the consideration of the detailed layout on site. So would parties consider it to be a prohibitive constraint, if you like, to development?
Again, no, definitely not prohibitive. Part of the technical investigation includes a heritage statement and concludes that indeed it could be dealt with through master plan exercise or a future plan application. I think Mr. Mitchell's said the same thing in his statement as well.
Yeah.
Yes,
Happy to take that as read, Mr. Mitchell.
Absolutely. And on the agricultural land point, Mom, we did put that figure in our statement. It's actually in our examination statement. The scale is not particularly helpful to you, though. Apologies for that. There are the site as a whole it's got 2 ponds on it as well, which means that it's not that conducive to using for arable farming, the southern part. And there is also some rough grazing on what I call the parcel 3, which is the 3 acres of land with the donkey on.
Oh. You didn't put in an appearance on my site visit then. Has been taking shelter. Okay, thank you for that clarification. The other point mentioned in the site assessment is this stepping stone feature within the LCR nature improvement area. Is that something you can enlighten me on, Mr. Cross?
That'll be the ponds that make it awkward to farm for arables.
Okay, thank you. And just in terms of from looking at how the site could be developed, would those be taken into account in terms of the overall master plan, or sort of incorporated as a feature? Would they be retained?
Sorry, I forgot to put my hand up then. Apologies. Yes, again, I think if you could refer to our master plan in the vision document, it's page 28. But just within that, it gives an illustrative design of the various parcels, and indeed, the 2 ponds are incorporated with sufficient sort of landscaping design around them. Okay,
thank you. Again, this issue of the landscape character area the whole area has been categorised through the landscape character study, presumably. Were there any particular landscape features, Mr. Cross, or the developers, which are particularly important in the landscape?
The technical information which has been submitted, there's a landscape and visual impact report from Tyler Grange. I'm just trying to get you the various paragraphs for that one. But again, I think through various master planning, there's nothing that would preclude development on the site for that reason.
Mr. Cross, from the perspective of the council, what was it's mentioned that the UDP identified important landscape features. Do you know what they are on the site?
I'm not aware of the features identified in particular relation to this site. As I say, the site is quite well screened from the north as the land rises. From the south, obviously, it is very visible. But it's extensively farmed and it doesn't have many features of particular interest. I don't think the site's got particular coverage of hedgerows, so it has limited importance.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, those hedgerows can be strengthened through through any potential development on the site. Just moving on to connectivity, the site assessment does refer to poor connectivity. Can I just ask, starting with the council, in terms of the existing sort of accessibility to services and public transport or pedestrian and cycleway links, and how the connectivity could be improved?
Again, the site is served by, I think, the same bus services that go down Queensberry Way and service the sites that were the subject of this morning's discussion. There are some proposed greenways close to the site, basically going up Queensberry Way. Effectively, the site is located quite close to a number of local services. It is close to Cronton Local Centre. The distances to the nearest primary school and the secondary schools are set out in the accompanying reports. I believe from memory the nearest primary school is less than 700 metres, the secondary school somewhat further. The site was concluded to have reasonable access to supporting services. Mr. Farmer is offering to basically come in and give you some additional detail in terms of the highways issues.
That would be useful, Mr. Farmer.
Yes, I mean, additional details in terms of linkages, I would imagine would be...
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Farmer. Is there a way of turning the volume up on your headset, maybe?
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Is that any better?
That's a lot better, thank you. Yeah.
That's good. Thank you. Yes, just to come in on the connectivity. As Mr. Cross said, bus routes are similar to the other site that we heard about this morning. So it's served by a Widnes Circular 26, which is hourly in each direction. Hourly if you add up the directions to hourly separately, and the number 7 service, which connects from Liverpool to Warrington. There are a lot, as we touched upon this morning, of new cycle links being developed in this area through the council's local cycle walking infrastructure plan, including Norlands Lane and links to Wilmere Lane. So those things are being addressed, particularly over time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Farmer. Ms. McGrath.
Only to add and signpost to the transport technical evidence by mode. It's section 2, pages 2 to 8, and that also provides some additional information on pedestrian links, local amenities and bus services.
Okay, thank you. I mean, are there any particular sort of suggested improvements arising from this site in particular, or sort of any particular connections into existing networks, for example?
Not in that detail, no. That's more, I suppose, left for the highways, the vehicular access, which just to conclude that the site is considered to be sustainable and accessible. by other modes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mitchell.
Just from our perspective, we always saw the site as being incredibly well connected. I just wanted to reference the fact that the council's evidence says it's satisfactory connectivity in EL069G, site reference 138. And we'd always saw the opportunity to link into the Pexhill Nature Reserve, to link to the Ford Sports and Recreation area as well as putting through routes in terms of pedestrian and cycleways through the site, linking up with Cronton College. So we see it as a highly well-connected area that will only improve through development. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. and Mrs. Harper.
Thank you. A note in the Greenbelt assessments that the Ford Recreation area has identified as being available. Of course, it's a private area, which you normally wouldn't have on your list, which has just been mentioned, in fact. And I guess that the closest, since Willmere Lane playing fields have been closed to public access, and that was going to be accessible from between Norlands Lane and Willmere Lane, which isn't anymore, of course, which may have made up this link that was just mentioned recently. That where is the nearest place to go to in terms of an open space? Is it Cronton, maybe, or is it down at Victoria Park? Because there's quite a gap, really. The other thing about the skills were mentioned, the closest primary is Cronton. It's not even in Halton. The closest school which you can walk to is Waydeacon, but that's not accessible to anybody at this part of the town anymore because of the catchment area. So it does need some sort of consideration in terms of the services and facilities that are available.
Okay, Mr. Cross, did you want to respond to those points?
Yes, thank you. I will. But just before I'm being directed, I've been resisting the urge to say the minions. The minions have been firing references at me. In terms of the landscape character assessment, it's document EL054, and I'm asked to direct you to page 144, which states effectively that the site has no great landscape features. So it's set out in guidance there. In terms of the assessment, I say accessibility, obviously all the sites are being assessed on equal terms in terms of access to the various facilities listed, notional water distances deemed appropriate for each of them. The site does have access to a number of services. In terms of open space, the sports social is shown clearly on the policies map as playing fields bracket private. I say we're just awaiting confirmation we've probably got confirmation from the programme officer for the document number to add to the playing pitch strategy, and that will be with you whenever we can put the number on the front cover, which deals with the issue of playing pitches. And we're providing you information on the current position with regards to the public open space.
Okay, thank you. Just moving on to the sort of vehicular access, if you like. Obviously, it's been a pivotal issue in downgrading the site to a safeguarded site. Mr. Cross, can you just set out the specific issues, or Mr. Farmer, in relation to the access?
Thank you, Ma'am. Yes, there's 2 points of access proposed by the developers putting forward this site, as you'd expect for the number of properties that are being considered. One of the junctions is onto Cronton Road near to the college. The drawings that have been shown, as was intimated before, show a simple junction with a ghost island, right turn lane, which, whilst may work in capacity terms, it would need to be determined through any planning application. We do have some concerns over conflicts with the college movements, and so our view is that further work is required to come up with a suitable alternative type of junction, and that would require liaison with the sixth form college, because it would be affecting their means of access. The secondary means of access is taken onto Norlands Lane at the very northern end of the site, and it would appear that that's slightly outside the actual allocation that's proposed for the safeguarded land, and so my understanding is that would need additional land to be able to deliver the secondary access, which I think would be a key part of the site. So that's really why we've concluded that in comparison to some other sites, the standard of access is not so sufficiently developed, or perhaps as easy to deliver. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Just picking up on the first point, and the potential conflict, if you like, of movements with the college. What would you envisage from a highways point of view that would need to sort of resolve any potential conflict there?
I think we'd need to look at either the junction in a different position, or a different type of junction, so possibly a roundabout or traffic signals, which then would have, particularly in the case of signals, a knock-on effect for inside of the college and needing equipment to operate signals inside the college.
Okay, thank you. And are you concerned about the conflict between sort of vehicles and pedestrians as well? Is that an issue?
There is. On the plans that have been provided, there is an attempt to move the pedestrian crossings locations. It's possible that we may end up with guardrail to guide pedestrians to the right place, which perhaps does have some issues with desirability. However, we'd have to look at that in more detail if there was an application to come forward.
Okay, thank you. And do you consider, well, not wanting to preempt any detail that may come in, do you consider that those potential concerns are resolvable, depending obviously on the detail provided by the developers?
It needs further work, but yes, our view, as we had considered earlier, is that there would be a solution to be achieved, I think.
Okay, thank you. Coming back to your second point in relation to Norlands Lane, essentially you're suggesting that any potential secondary access could be within the greenbelt, or the additional land may need to be excluded from the greenbelt. Is that right?
There appears to be a small piece of existing residential land or farmhouse land just outside of the allocation, which I'm not certain whether is third-party land or not, or alternatively, as I've mentioned earlier on today, an alternative location for an access may be if there was a purchase of existing property on Norlands Lane.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cross, were you aware of those concerns about potential access sort of outside the safeguarded site, if you like, within the greenbelt?
Yes, as I say, obviously in our consideration, the fact that the access arrangements were still subject to some query was obviously a consideration that was taken into account. In terms of the land ownerships at the northern portion, I think it's effectively the safeguarded notation doesn't quite extend, and the northern tip doesn't extend all the way to Norlands Lane. It does show there's a small area of primarily residential on the map. And I say we're not sure who controls that area and whether that area is available for the provision of the secondary access.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Mr. Mitchell can enlighten us on that point.
I think Ms. McGrath will enlighten you on that one. It's her client. I think her client owns all the land. From our perspective, we're not the only site that doesn't have a detailed highways access scheme that's been approved by the council at this point in the local plan process. I suspect they're all in a not dissimilar vein. We've always saw the opportunity and we're quite comfortable with access solution fronting onto Cronton Lane. We're well aware of the relationship with the college. I was pleased from Mr. Farmer's conclusion that with the ownership of the client and also the Highways Authority there, that a solution will be found. Obviously, when you're putting in a new solution, you will always have regard to pedestrian movements, safe crossing and school children, etc. At the same time, so it'll be designed in a way that the council are compliant with. Our own investigations in the past have also alluded to the fact that you could just come off that junction as one access and create a loop within the site. So I think there's various solutions. So we're not concerned about the access concern, and Ms. McGrath, I'm sure, will address the north-eastern point.
Okay, thank you. Ms. McGrath?
Thank you. Yes, just a point of clarification, I suppose. Whilst the allocation doesn't completely include the access, our client has full ownership of that land. Therefore, I'm sure an access can be achieved between the ownership of our client's land and highway land, and that there is, as Mr. Farmer alluded to, there is a potential resolvable solution.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Cross, obviously the creation of an access within the Greenbelt could have sort of additional impacts, if you like, on Greenbelt purposes. What's your view on that?
I think there was always, as mentioned before, it was always envisaged that there would be a secondary access in the north, and it was envisaged that the provision of that access would potentially form part of the creation of a hard border, a hard boundary. So I don't think that this is raising any new issues.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mitchell, did you want to add to that before I bring in Mr. Harper? Oh, your hand's still up. Okay, thank you. Mr. Harper.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to emphasise the situation in terms of the Sixth Form College. At certain times, you've got the college students coming right across the road, and obviously the buses off to back towards Widnes, and it is very busy with buses. And I think something that was suggested just a few minutes ago was that you make a big change to that access. If you're going to do a development on that site, you should take everything together and do it all at one go, and set space aside for the bus access and connecting the two major roads, the Cronton Lane with the site access, which would be the main access to the site.
To be paid for by the developer.
Well, yes, too. Obviously.
And then my second issue is that the secondary access road coming out onto Norlands Lane still doesn't address the problem with the junction at the bottom of Norlands Lane.
Thank you. Mr. Farmer, did you want to respond to those particular points?
Yes, I'm happy to respond to that. I've got no more to say really on the access onto Cronton Lane there. Yes, that would need to be considered, as I think I've already covered. The junction of Norlands Lane, if there were additional traffic coming out of Norlands Lane, yes, that's a fair consideration as well, which would also need to be looked at the time of a planning application, similar to the other sites that we talked about this morning. The only thing I would say is that the junction that's shown at the moment would be at the very north end of Norlands Lane. So likelihood is that you would only go that way if it was a shorter journey for you, i.e. if you lived at the very north end of the site, I would suggest.
Okay, Mr. Harper.
Sorry, the point is that the people coming out to the site from either direction will go through the same Norlands Lane.
They may well do, unless they're specifically heading west towards Cronton.
Generally, they'd be going the other way because they might be going to the motorway, might be going to the town centre. They'll be going up to the Norlands Lane, Birchfield Road junction, which has already been identified earlier as being a bit of an issue already without the additional traffic that would be generated. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Harper, just on that point, in terms of obviously there would be various technical solutions to the junctions or to the two access points, but in terms of the overall capacity of the local road network to support a development of that scale, are you comfortable, Mr. Farmer, that can be accommodated subject to those potential improvements?
As I said before, there is space for some improvements, and improvements are in the process of being identified. But yes, subject to it being looked at as part of the technical submissions with the planning application. Yes, there is some room to potentially improve the junctions in that area.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mitchell, Ms. McGrath, anything to add in terms of the sort of local impact on the highways network in terms of any initial transport work that's been undertaken for the site?
Nothing further to add, thank you.
Okay, thank you. If there's nothing more in terms of the local impact on the local network, I'm assuming, as per this morning's session, that the impact on strategic network would have similar issues to the site we discussed this morning in terms of junction 762. Is that right?
That is correct.
Yep. Okay. And in terms of education and healthcare, similar response to this morning?
Identical.
Brilliant, thank you. That curtails the discussion somewhat on those matters. Okay, so those are the points I wanted to raise in terms of potential adverse impacts and infrastructure requirements. So just to conclude on infrastructure requirements, are there any constraints which would preclude development of the site coming forward? Just to summarise on that particular point. Mr. Cross to start with.
I don't believe any prohibitive constraints have been identified, no.
Okay. Anything to add? Mr. Mitchell, Ms. McGrath?
No, just support Mr. Cross's comment there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harper.
Sorry, just the one last question, which is when land is taken out of Greenbelt, there's a requirement to improve remaining Greenbelt. What plans are there for this particular site? Thank you.
So the compensatory improvements
Yes,
you're going to, yeah. Mr. Cross first and then developers.
As I say, at the moment, the plan's proposing it as safeguarded land, so it's not proposing it for development, so I would pass that to the developers.
Mr. Mitchell, Ms. McGrath, is there scope sort of within the site or within the land ownership of your client to accommodate compensatory improvements?
Again, sorry, Mr. Mitchell. I forgot to put my hand up again.
Well, I've forgotten to do that as well. Sorry, you go first. Ladies first.
Just to say, again, as part of the vision document and the various technical work which has been undertaken for landscape, ecology, there's some, again, ponds marked on the site, various landscaping improvements. So as part of master planning and a future planning application, I think there could be a number of compensatory measures available as part of any development.
And would that be anticipated to be within the site or within your client's land ownership outside of the site?
Within the site.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on to developability and viability. Presumably the site is available, given the presence of the landowner and potential developer. Just looking at the sort of potential timescales, clearly, and any discussion that we have would not prejudice the potential outcome of the deliberations on this site and whether it should come forward. But in terms of the timescales for moving forward, potential planning application to be submitted, and potential start dates on site, what would the developers anticipate should the site be allocated within this current local plan period, please?
Again, just to reiterate, there's significant developer interest in the site. It's likely that 2 developers could be on site at the same time. Developer interest has been evidenced through letters which are supported in our hearing statement. So with that in mind, I think it's sensible and reasonable to say that, you know, an application could be submitted this year, next year, in terms of delivery rates, around 40, 45 a year, dwellings per year. So delivery could commence in 2023 onwards.
Okay, and just looking at the potential start date, would that be sort of throughout, from the start of the year, middle of the year, towards the end of the year, for example? What would the output be in that first year?
Again, dependent on achieving planning consent. As I say, there's a lot of interest from developers with excellent delivery rates. So middle of 2023, I don't think there'd be any dispute on house builders wanting to get on site.
And in terms of the initial work that's been undertaken on site, clearly there has been some work in terms of looking at potential constraints, etc. Would it be realistic to get a planning application in within those timescales? Are you in a position to do that?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, thank you. And you mentioned potentially 2 developers. So would the build rate be 40 to 45 units per outlet rather than for the site? Per outlet.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mitchell, do you agree with Ms. McGrath's assessment there?
Yeah, no, I broadly concur with all of those comments. I just thought I'd refer to our development framework document as well, where we split the site into 3 areas, and the overall capacity of that we saw at around about 435 dwellings. It's 16.36 hectares in total. And really the only thing I was going to add on top of that was you mentioned the 3 acres donkey field that I referred to, and that being under separate ownership. That hasn't got an access. We see that coming through parcel 1, and I think that's the land that the infamous Frank Marshall had been involved with in his meeting with the council some time ago. But we see that as coming forward as part of the site as well. But overall, 16.36 hectares, and that equates to around 435 dwellings.
I mean, have there been discussions with the owner of that particular site in terms of how it would tie into the overall development?
Yeah, I mean, my client's position is that they've got an option with the Corwell land. They're seeking to exercise that option immediately, and they have had discussions with the landowner of the donkey field.
Okay, would that be right, Ms. McGrath?
I can confirm the comment on the option in terms of the discussions with the landowner of the donkey field. I can't really comment on that one.
Okay, no, fair enough. In terms of the overall capacity, you mentioned 435 dwellings for the whole site. What was it initially identified for again, Mr. Cross?
It was previously identified as having 362.
350 or 62?
62, 362.
Right. Okay. And how? What's your view in terms of the capacity and the sort of potential increase?
Again, I say it's the efficient use of land. If it's delivering a workable scheme that's fully policy compliant, then we obviously would have an objection to that.
Okay, so in terms of populating those tables we've asked you to do, that would be the capacity that you would include.
I will happily use I can use the developer capacity. Just one point, would both outlets start generating units at the same time, or would there be a year or two lag for the second outlet to come on stream?
I'd confirm that it would be 2 at the same time. Again, we'd be of the view that development could effectively start at the north and the south of the site.
Cool.
Thank you. Mr. Harper.
Thank you, Mark. Just for clarification, bearing in mind I live a couple of 100 yards down the road from the start of this site and regularly walk up Norlands Lane and regularly walk up Peck's Hill, where on earth is this donkey field you talk of? Because we've certainly not seen it.
The donkeys might have been moved then. I don't know. Maybe they're isolating or something. But it's at the back of the sports centre, and it's in between the site and the Ford sports pitch areas. And there's a sort of sports centre facility in there that council's coloured in on its proposals map. And I haven't been there for some time, so the donkey might have moved, Ms. Harper.
The donkey was certainly elusive on my site visit.
It's been there definitely in the past. I'll find a photo if I can for you.
I don't think that would be necessary, but thank you very much anyway. Okay, in terms of the sort of potential development, we've established potential output. I'm assuming viability is not an issue either. Given that there's significant developer interest. Yeah, brilliant. Okay then, well that concludes my questions in terms of this particular site. So does anyone else have anything to add before we conclude discussions? No? Brilliant. Finished in record time for me then. Well, thank you very much for all of your contributions, and some of us will be back around the table at 9:30 tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you.